Good morning, second service. These are my people because I know that you're all football fans. You've been up late watching football, and so you slept in all morning. No, I am from Alabama, and we do love football, but that's not what I'm going to talk about today. Maybe a little, but not a lot. And I'm not going to try to get you on my side. If you're for Alabama, that's great. You're going to heaven with me. For everyone else, I'm sorry. No, Jay, good to meet you out here. I didn't know you were right behind me. But my name's Joseph. I'm from Madison, Alabama, all of that. And my wife's name is Kinsley. I think she might be watching online, so I'll say hello to Kinsley online. She's probably, if she's not watching, she's chasing our two little boys. We have a 9-month-old that just started crawling like a couple of weeks ago, and so he's everywhere all the time. And we have a 4-year-old who is even worse. He's everywhere that the 9-year-old's not. So we're just, it takes a village, right? So the pandemic has taught us a lot as parents, a lot of new things. I don't know if you have had a lot of aha moments during the pandemic, or if it's just been like, I cannot wait for this to be over. That's where we're at. But in the pandemic, we've had a lot of interesting times with our children, with our 4-year-old especially, because he's sort of things are in his head are starting to click about life and about the way things work. And so one of those things would be birthday. He had a birthday during the quarantine time when we were shut down for sure. Like you could not go outside except go get your groceries, that kind of thing. And during that, he had a birthday. And so me and my wife, Kinsley, were thinking, how do we make this birthday special when we can't invite his friends and we can't invite family in, and we're supposed to be like locked in the house? How fun is that going to be for him? And so we were like, well, what's the one thing that he loves more than anything? And we're like, balloons. He loves balloons more than anything, more than any kid has ever loved balloons in their lives. Camden, my 4-year-old, loves balloons. And so we're like, well, let's do this. This might be fun. Let's get a pack of like 100 balloons and just blow them up and just have them all over the house for him to just run around and do what he does with balloons. And so we do that. We put streamers on his door and do this whole big thing. And he comes out that morning, and he's never had streamers on his door, so that was a brand new thing. Watching a kid see things like that, simple things for the very first time, is kind of mind-blowing. You're like, this isn't even that much. But he's like, whoa! He's walking through his streamers and out like a little king. It's his birthday, and he cannot wait to see what's going on. Now, we have gifts and everything laid out for him, but also all he sees is 100 balloons. And he turns to us and he's like, this is the best birthday ever. And we're like, oh, that's sweet. He doesn't know yet that nobody's coming to see him. And then, and as we get through the day, he does start to realize. He starts to make connections. He's like, usually when I have a birthday or there's a party, there's people here. And we're like, yeah, buddy. And so we had to have some hard conversations about COVID and about people getting sick. And, he's really good about wearing his mask. It's sort of like, he just does it because we ask him to do it. But, we've had to talk about what sickness what happens when people are sick. And we've had these weird, awkward conversations of trying to let him know about like death and teach him about those things. And now that we have a little one, we're like, don't give him that Lego. And then he's like, oh, because he'll die. And so, yeah, we're like, exactly. So it has been good. It has been good to be able to teach him some of those things. But it's been a weirdly awful year. And I'm sure you agree with me. 2020 has been weirdly awful. And so I'm kind of dropping us in the middle this morning of a weirdly awful scripture. And that's sort of my style. If you listen to me at all ever in the future, you see my name pop up, it's probably a place in Scripture that nobody else really goes to preach. That's kind of what I do. But Numbers 16 is where we're at. If you follow along in your Bible, I think it'll be on the screens for you. But in Numbers 16, I'm going to drop us on verse 41, which is right in the middle, right after something sort of really bad has happened. So in verse 41 of Numbers, we see this. But on the next day, all the congregation of the people of Israel grumbled against Moses and against Aaron, saying, you have killed the people of the Lord. Now, let's just kind of stop and talk for a minute. There's a lot going on in that one sentence that you might, if you read it closely enough, are like, what? So first of all, it's but on the next day. So there's something that has happened that has put us in this place where the congregation of the people of Israel. Everybody in Israel is grumbling against Moses and Aaron. Now, that doesn't throw any red flags because all throughout the Old Testament, the people of Israel grumbled against Moses and against Aaron. So that's just happening again. But they make this statement, you have killed the people of the Lord. And you're like, Moses and Aaron are people of the Lord. How did they kill somebody of the Lord? Well, what has happened is just before this, and I'm not going to read all of it or anything, but the reason it says on the next day is because the day before this, there was a coup happening. There was a guy and his family named Korah, and he and his family had decided to rebel against Moses and Aaron. Best we can consider is probably out of jealousy. He wanted to be the top dog because he was a Levite. And Levites, if you know anything about the Levitical tribe, it was the group of priests. They were the ones especially appointed and anointed for things like they would eventually carry the Ark of the Covenant back and forth whenever it needed to move. They would set up and establish temple worship. They brought sacrifices before God for the people. These were the pastors and elders of Israel. That's what the Levitical tribe. And Korah was a particular family within that Levitical tribe. And he rallies together about 250 chiefs from that Levitical tribe to go against and try to overthrow Moses and Aaron. So in that moment, and sort of the family name kind of sticks, so you might read on in Psalms or somewhere where it mentions this is a psalm of Korah. This was literally it was literally the worship leaders of the Levitical tribe. So this group, they were the ones that probably led the songs and the congregational singing for temple worship. And whenever they had temple worship, this was literally like it was if Javi was trying to overthrow Rob and Duran these days. So he was trying to gather up a lot of people and overthrow these guys, and there was a whole big thing. And God steps in the middle of it, and he opens up the earth, and it swallows Korah and his family. And then there's about 250 other chiefs of the Levitical tribe with them. They're kind of rallied, but when they see what happens to Korah and his family, they start to run, and God's like, not so fast, boom, fire from heaven, boom, they're consumed. So 250 people plus lost their lives on the day before this. And because they were Levites, the people of Israel are rather upset about it. And they come before Moses and Aaron and they're like, you have killed the people of the Lord. And so that brings us right back here. And I need to talk about the whole congregation for just a second. What's great about Numbers is it's all about numbers. I don't know if there's engineers in here or mathematicians or teachers, but Numbers is about numbers. Moses did a census, and when he sent out the census, he was able to collect information on everyone that he had in the congregation of Israel, like any good leader should. Rob was telling me about how many people were registered and who they were, and a little bit of information about that for this Sunday, and he collects your registrations. He knows every name. He knows who's here and who's not here. And he prays for you coming into this Sunday. And for the ones of your congregation that aren't here, he's praying for them and reaching out to them too, like any good senior leader should. And Moses wanted to know how many people are collected under my leadership. And with that, you have about 600,000 fighting men. So the people that would go out to battle if they ran up against another group of people that they needed to fight, you had about 600,000 men who would be ready and willing to fight then. And you can triple that number, roughly triple it for the number that were wives and children of those families of those 600,000 men. And so altogether, everyone in the nation, the whole congregation of Israel, would have been around 2.5 million people. So 2.5 million people one morning are knocking at the door of Moses and Aaron, and as they come out, they're like, you've killed the people of the Lord, now we're going to kill you. And so there's this whole tension building between Moses and Aaron and the rest of 2.5 million people. This is not a really good circumstance for Moses and Aaron. So we're going to pick up and read 42 and a few other verses. And then the congregation had assembled against Moses and Aaron. They turned toward the tent of meeting, and behold, the cloud covered it, and the glory of the Lord appeared. And Moses and Aaron came to the front of the tent of meeting, and the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, get away from the midst of this congregation, that I might consume them in a moment. So there's like a little flashback of what happened to Korah and his 250 people when they rebelled against Moses and Aaron. It's about to happen to the entire 2.5 million people in the congregation of Israel. So there's this tension building where God is about to do something. Because when the cloud comes down, you might have noticed when they turned, the tent of meeting is over there and a cloud comes and covers it. And when the cloud came and covered it, that meant the presence of the Lord was coming into the place. Now, if you know your Old Testament history, when the cloud came in and the presence of the Lord was among the people, one of two things was about to happen. They were about to get a really great blessing. God was about to feed them manna or quail or whatever it might have been, or destruction was coming. And this was not the former. What was about to happen is God was coming down to see what was going on among the people and to be present there and to let Moses and Aaron get a little bit of a head start and get out of the way because he was about to consume the people with whatever means necessary. I don't know if it was going to be earth opening up like Korah or if it was going to be fire from heaven or some new thing that he just makes up because he's God and he's the creator of everything. And if he says it, it happens. And so we don't know what was going to happen, but the cloud came down and he says, you're going to need to move because I'm about to consume the people of Israel in a moment. And I want you to see something else really special. Moses and Aaron did not just like, okay, Lord, you have at it. They didn't just get out of the way and let God do his thing. They fell on their faces, one in reverence to God because his presence was there. But you're going to see in just a moment, they were going to beg and intercede for the people of Israel's lives. This was leadership who everyone was against, but their heart was still that God would save their people. And so there's this moment about to happen, and it's going to make all of this seem really real. And pick up in verse 46 for a moment. And Moses said to Aaron, take your censer and put fire on it from off the altar and lay incense on it and carry it quickly to the congregation and make atonement for them. For wrath has gone out from the Lord, and the plague has begun. So Aaron took it as Moses said, and ran into the midst of the assembly. And behold, the plague had already begun among the people. And he put on incense and made atonement for the people. And he stood between the dead and the living, and the plague was stopped. Now those who died in the plague were 14,700, besides those who died in the affair of Korah. And Aaron returned to Moses at the entrance of the tent of meeting when the plague had stopped. Man, what a beautiful picture. Let's talk about something for a second. I love football. Like I said, I'm an Alabama fan, and we do football really good in Alabama. I don't know where everybody is here today. I don't know if there's, but I love the unsung heroes of college football too, the mascots. All right, the mascots are hilarious. I am a big-time fan of when there's like a special on ESPN where the mascots are like working out and getting ready for the game or so. That tickles me for whatever reason. I just love it when mascots are doing goofy mascot things. Now, Alabama, we have Big Al. I don't know if you're familiar, but Big Al's just this elephant with this like belly. It's like a hula hoop belly. Inside of it, it's a hula hoop or something. And he like hula hoops and it jiggles and all that kind of stuff. And you're like, that's fun for the families and kids, but that's not going to like send terror into the hearts of the other team. Let's just be real. Big Al is a family-friendly mascot. And he doesn't seem like the type that is going to be ahead of a team that's going to just knock you off your socks, which Alabama will to everyone this season. I'm just saying. But there's lots of those little family-friendly mascots, and then there's mascots that you're like, that team, they've got a good mascot. One of those being in Tallahassee, your neighbors up north, in Doak Campbell Stadium, there's one named Chief Osceola. Now, Chief Osceola, if you're not familiar, is this Seminole warrior chief. And before a game, Chief Osceola rides his stallion, Renegade, across the field and around the field, getting the crowd all pumped up. And not only is this warrior chief riding around on this white stallion, but he's also holding in his hand a spear. Now, this spear isn't just a spear, it's on fire. And so he's riding around with a flaming spear, getting the crowd hyped up, and then he rides to the middle and rears up Renegade and stabs it into the middle of the field. And I'm getting chills talking about it. I'm like, oh my goodness, get me ready to play for the Florida State Seminoles, because I don't want to play against the Florida State Seminoles, because Chief Osceola has put on some sort of weird mojo juice in the middle of the field, and we don't want a part of that, because he has just slammed it in the middle of the field. And it's as if he slams that spear down and says, you stop here. The other team, whoever you are, you stop here. Now, unfortunately, Florida State's terrible, so it doesn't work quite like Chief Osceola hopes it will. But my goodness, what a picture of a team ready for battle. Chief Osceola riding in, and boom, right in the middle of the field. What's happened here in Numbers is the wrath of God has begun to take over the people of Israel. And the people of Israel are about to experience what that looks like. And we'll just read through the rest of this chapter. So he's talked about, I've already read through the rest of the chapter. We'll talk about the rest of the chapter. I'm sorry. What you have is Aaron takes his censer and in Chief Osceola fashion runs out into the assembly of God. Now, I don't know what you know about, I don't know if you come from a traditional background or anything like an Orthodox type background where they do use censers and incense and things like that during their worship times. But to give you a little bit of a context, my father was a forestry worker. He was a forester, and he taught me a lot about things like putting out forest fires. Now, I can't go put out a forest fire. I'm not trained for that. But he taught me a lot about what they do. And out west, there's forest fires raging across California and other places out west. And there's a lot of natural reasons for that. But what they will try to do, and you'll see on TV or the news or wherever you're watching them try to put out these fires, they will desperately try to put a fire line around wherever the fire is to contain it. Now, what a fire line is, they just try to dig and push away any resources, any fuel that a fire can use to spread and continue to spread further and further out. That fire line is supposed to be the place where it stops. And even though a lot of things within that containment area have already burned, you have to say, well, that's already burned, but we can't let it go any further, so let's stop it here. Let's push away all the trees, all the fuel, all the grass, everything that a fire can consume. Let's push it away so that when it gets here, hopefully it will stop and we can start flooding it with water and things to help it die out. Now, that's the way you fight a forest fire. And in much the same way, you see Aaron take his censer, and he's going to try his best to make the death stop in the congregation. He's going to try to put a perimeter around it so that those who have died, they've died. And he's going to try to get God, he's going to try to intercede and get God to stop the death where it is. So he runs out with his censer, and he's throwing the incense on it, and he's trying to pray to the Lord. He's making atonement for the people that still want to kill him, by the way. He's making atonement for them, running out into the midst of them as a wave of death is covering them. Okay, so in my mind, I picture this moment where I'm picturing like massive amounts of people, and from left to right, they're just starting to drop because death is just coming over, like the Passover in Egypt. We've seen God do this before where the death angel passes over and people just start dying, and there's no sense about it. There's no reason beyond it except for death has covered the people, and it's coming, and it's coming, and it's coming. And Aaron finally gets to a point where he stands between the dead and the living, and it stops. And it's this beautiful picture of what Jesus will eventually do for us. As Aaron stands there between the dead and the living, it stops. And this foreshadowing of Jesus is a beautiful picture of the gospel for us. If you turn to Luke chapter 7, we see this played out a little bit as Jesus comes upon a funeral. And in this funeral procession, we'll just read it now that you're there. Soon afterward, he went to a town called Nain. This is Jesus. Jesus went to a town called Nain, and his disciples and a great crowd went with him. As he drew near to the gate of the town, behold, a man who had died was being carried out, the only son of his mother, and she was a widow. And a considerable crowd from the town was with her. And when the Lord saw her, he had compassion on her, and he said to her, "Do not weep." And he came up and he touched the bier, and the bearers stood still. And he said, "Young man, I say to you, arise." And the man sat up and he began to speak, and Jesus gave him to his mother. Fear seized them all, and they glorified God, saying, "A great prophet has arisen among us, and God has visited his people." And this report about him spread throughout the whole of Judea and all of the surrounding country. So this is a really cool miracle, but can we put ourselves in the position of this widow or the people in that funeral procession for just a second? You've got someone who has died, and think about any funeral that you've ever been to. There's a procession, they're moving the casket out, and that's exactly what was happening. They were moving this body to the catacombs where he would be put into a tomb or placed somewhere where he would spend his days. And Jesus comes up, and not only Jesus, but he's got his 12 goofy disciples, and he's got a crowd following him because he's been doing miracles and he's been feeding people, and people have heard about that. So he's got this crowd with him, and they just come upon this funeral. Now, this is most people, if you've been going on the road when a funeral procession goes by or anything like that, most people respect the funeral procession by pulling off to the side or just stopping and allowing the funeral to come through out of respect to the family and those in that procession. You would not usually have a massive crowd of people and the leader of that massive crowd of people come upon that funeral procession and stop it. That's a little bit, you're like, Jesus, that's a little bit disrespectful. Can you imagine being that widow in that moment when this guy you don't know stops the funeral of your son? It just seems like it's incredibly disrespectful. But Jesus does one thing that no prophet, priest, or king could ever do. And it's the one thing that Aaron couldn't do when he ran out into the congregation of people, when he runs with his censer out into the dying people. Jesus is able to take the dead and stop the funeral where it is and raise the dead back to life. And that's the beauty of who Jesus is. He is the perfection of Aaron and every priest that has come before him and every king that has come before him and every prophet. The people say, a great prophet has risen among us. No, not a great prophet. God has visited you on this day. And he has risen the dead back to life. And for Aaron, back in Numbers, one of the key things about how heroic this was for Aaron to do, there was no one that was going to be able to purify Aaron if he touched a dead body. Because you see, if a priest touched a dead body in those days, they were deemed unclean. Therefore, not able to perform their priestly duties, not able to go before God. In the tent of meeting, Aaron would not have ever been able to be in the presence of God again. But Aaron took the risk to save the people. Jesus is the perfection of what Aaron could not do. Even if one of those dead bodies would have touched Jesus, he literally places his hand on this dead young man. Doesn't make Jesus unclean. Jesus isn't afraid of what's going to happen. He knows that out from him is going to be life. So in this moment, this young man sits up and he's back reunited with his mother, and this is this beautiful picture of the dead coming to life. And Jesus did that very thing for us at the cross. Where at the cross, he didn't just stop death, he took on death, because we're all living. The pandemic has got us all very aware of things that can affect us. The pandemic has us all very aware that a disease can very easily lead to death. But in fact, we're all dying from sin. Now, sin has some physical implications, but it's got eternal consequences. And we know that we are among the dying and the dead when we are living in our sin. And Jesus at the cross took that death upon himself and gives us the free gift of life. And we know that he can do that because not only did he raise this young man, but after 3 days of being dead, he raised himself back to life. And if he's the one that holds the keys to sin and to death, he's the one that holds the keys to life more abundant. And he wants to give that free gift to us this morning, right here. If you've never given your life and your faith to Jesus and said, I want to go from being dead to being alive, and I believe that Jesus has made that possible for me because he is the way, the truth, and the life. He is the gate, and we are the sheep, and it's by him that we enter in to the rest of God. And so this morning, I just want to leave you with that question. Have you placed your faith in him this morning? Have you recognized the fact that he has power over life and death, and you have stepped out from death into life? We sang about it this morning. When he called my name, and I ran out of that grave. Have you run out of the grave? Have you taken hold of a life of faith in Jesus Christ? A life, he says, is more abundant. He has immeasurably more than you could ever ask or imagine waiting for each of us. And again, there are physical implications to that as well, but it's an eternal glory with Jesus, never-ending glory through our salvation, eternity basking in his light and his life. The real pandemic is over because of Jesus. So this morning, I just want to leave you with that. I'm going to pray for you. Now I'll turn it back over to the worship team.